Hi, it's Dennis Daly. You know, sometimes you get sent out on assignment to do an interview and you dread it, and you get there and you just have to fight to get through the hour. Well, once I did an interview that was just the opposite of that. You know, now and then you get a phone call that you know is going to lead to something fun. A public relations agent named Frank Lieberman called me up and he said, "Hey, I want you to interview two songwriters." And I said, "Okay, who?" And when he said Jay Livingston and Ray Evans, I jumped at the chance. They are celebrating their 60th anniversary together. In case the names do not ring a bell, I'm sure if I say to you, "Sing Tammy for me," you can. I hear the cottonwoods whispering above. Tammy, Tammy, Tammy's in love. We all know that song. The theme for Mr. Ed, A Horse is a Horse, of course, and Bonanza. Bum-ba-da-dum-ba-da-dum-ba-da-dum. By the way, that has words. Oh, here we come with a gun on the run. We'll be talking about Bonanza and Mr. Ed and all the wonderful songs they have written over the past 60 years on this week's American Montage. I sat down with Jay Livingston and Ray Evans at Jay's house. It overlooks Hollywood and has a beautiful view. The first thing I wanted to know as I talked to these men now in their 80s, spry, intelligent, still writing music, was how they first got together 60 years ago.
At the University of Pennsylvania. That's where Ray went and where I went. The end of my freshman year, Ray was playing sax in a band that was going to Europe, and they needed a piano player. And that's how I got involved with them. And in my junior year, I took the band over myself, and Ray played sax in it. And we traveled all over the world. It was a wonderful thing. That's how we met.
The thought occurs to me that, I forget whom it was I was interviewing, maybe it was Steve Allen, who told me that he was impressed with the reemergence of musicianship at the college level. I went to Indiana University, where we had a wonderful jazz and a wonderful opera school. What about that level of musicianship? When you talk to young people now, what do you see as far as what's going on in colleges?
Mm-hmm. Well, I've never really talked to young people on this level. Instead, you said Indiana University. That's Hoagie Carmichael, too. That's a pretty good attribute to Indiana University. But I've heard, at North Texas State, they have a jazz band. It's probably one of the great jazz bands of the world. And I noticed that I go to a lot of football games here, and the marching bands are playing a lot of jazz. Not jazz, they're playing a lot of rock and a lot of mud. I don't think they play it very well, but there is a recognition that there's more to music than Sousa marches, etc. And when they do have jazz programs at these schools, the people I've heard have been very good. Now, I'm going on a jazz cruise tomorrow, and it's the third year I've been out. It's just for a week out of Miami, and they have great jazz people in there. And 2 years ago when I was there, they had an all-women's jazz band, who were just wonderful, and every one of them was a student or a graduate student at one of the at a musical college. So there is a lot of recognition and a lot of implementation of jazz in among the young people. This girls' band called the Divas were wonderful.
Was it Phil Spitalny? Was that his name? Who had the all-girl orchestra?
Yeah, Phil Spitalny. Phil Spitalny had an all-girl orchestra. Evelyn and her magic violin, I remember. They had a brother named Leopold, and he had a terrible accent. And they met in the street one day, and Leopold said, "Hi, Phil, how do you feel?" That's an old story.
That wasn't a jazz band. That was more of a, the Guy Lombardo, Wayne King kind of thing of that era. But it was an all-girls band. And I know Ray Hunton, I think, had an all-girls band, too, in that era. Mm-hmm.
I've told this story a lot, but you mentioned Hoagie Carmichael. I've given it away already. My Aunt Pauline went to Indiana University, and she came back home one weekend, and my mother's family were kind of a generation away from being Amish. I called it Amish light. Wow. And my Aunt Pauline told my grandfather that she wanted to date this fellow named Hoagland Carmichael, but that he was considering leaving law school to continue writing music, and my grandfather cautioned my aunt to give up this shiftless musician, or I might have been Hoagie Carmichael's nephew.
I never knew his name was Hoagland. You just told me something. It's always been Hoagie to me.
Ray Evans, who wrote the lyrics, whether or not most lyricists are not musicians, whether they're just the writers of poetry, or whether they can write both words and music.
I've never really thought about that one way or another. I was, a semi-musician, not really a musician. I could play a saxophone a little bit and a clarinet, but you're right. Most, like Johnny Mercer, couldn't, he was not a musician, and Leo Robin was not a musician, or the great one, Larry Hart, was not a musician. So most lyricists lyricist or not. But of course, if you're an Irving Berlin or a Cole Porter or a Frank Lesser who do both, then you're a musician and a lyricist, and the lyric part of your life is also part of the music of your life.
What is it like to have music come from you? There's the wonderful story, true or not, that when Handel was in the process of writing Messiah, his butler came in, and Handel is just emotionally drained. He's been crying, and the butler said, "What's wrong?" He said, "Nothing." He said, "I just heard the Hallelujah chorus." Well, of course, he was the first person to hear it. I've always felt that there's something, whether you call it God or something, that inspires a person. What is it like to have a melody come from you, and you're the first person to hear it?
Well, we worked at Paramount for 10 years, and we had daily assignments. They wanted it tomorrow, a week, 2 weeks. You can't wait for inspiration. It's like in The King of Paris that we wrote about Alexandre Dumas. His son said to him, "I don't have any talent." And Dumas said, "I don't have talent. This table has talent," which is a great line. You sit down and you do it.
Well, they say that Hemingway was very much that way. I did a broadcast from his house in Key West, Florida, and the person showing me around said Hemingway was such a slow and plodding writer, he had to assign certain times of day that he had to sit down and force himself to write, or he'd never get it done.
Yeah, well, we're in that way, sort of that way, too. We haven't been doing much writing lately, and when we do it, we have to force ourselves to do it, but we do it once in a while. But in the days that Jay was talking about, we were on a contract at Paramount Studios for over 10 years, and we'd go in at 9, or I'd go in at 9, Jay'd come in about noon for lunch, and then we'd do whatever the assignment was, which is a picture for Bob Hope, or a big musical, or a title song, or whatever we were asked to do, and it was a wonderful, wonderful 10 years we spent there, and of course it makes life very easy now, the royalties from the things we created during those days, so you know, but it's harder now to do it. I say we have to force ourselves now to do it.
There's a great story about the Beatles. Have you heard the story about scrambled eggs?
No.
Apparently, McCartney had a melody running through his head, and he was da-da-dum, da-da-da-da-da-da-da-dum, and they just called it scrambled eggs, and they had it for years before one of them put the words yesterday to it, and the rest is history.
That's one of their best songs.
Yeah.
You know, we were famous for writing title songs. Paramount wanted a title song for every picture, and To Each His Own was a big one, and Tammy was a big one at Universal, Bonanza, and Mr. Ed. We had to write... Yeah, Gold Earrings. We had to write When Worlds Collide. We had to write Vertigo. We had to write Crosswinds. We had to write Beyond. I don't know what Beyond Glory means, but we wrote it. Sangaree. We didn't know what Sangaree meant. But we sit down and make it up, and it works. You know, and sometimes they're hits.
Now, Golden Earrings.
Yeah.
Are you talking about? Which I associate with Victor Young.
His music. We only did lyrics on it, sure. We only, like on Dear Heart, to another title song, we only did lyrics to Ben Seeley's music. Boy, you sing and whistle. Were you a performer or what?
Oh, thank you. I'm so flattered by that. I'm an inveterate whistler. My dad could do all kinds of ornate, wonderful... I can't even do it here, but trilling, flutter-tonguing kind of things. I can whistle very high and on pitch. Are either of you bothered by loud noises?
No.
All right, I want to do, whenever a young kids say to me, "How do you whistle?" I said, "You got to practice this. You have to be able to hit the notes square." But yet, you see, if you have an art for whistling, that's also an art for irritation for a lot of people.
No, that's sensational. I never heard anybody whistle that high.
Oh, thank you.
It sounds like Cleo Lane notes.
I guess I'm so full of stories. I heard this one the other day, that they're piping Cleo Lane's music out of loudspeakers to keep the birds off the runway at Heathrow Airport.
Really? She's a friend of ours. We were going to do a musical on Broadway with her at one time. It fell through, unfortunately, but we did become good friends. She's a great, great talent and a lovely, charming lady. So all her success is well deserved.
I thank you for the compliment. I think that there must be a rewarding thing for the composer to be able to see the music and the lyric performed by someone who does it well. Can you give me some examples of finally hearing your music performed the way you wanted it to?
Well, Rosemary Clooney made some wonderful records. Dinah Shore, Nat Cole was fantastic. They were all great. Once in a while, somebody made a record of a song that bugged me. They didn't sing the melody right.
Or the right chords behind the melody.
I enjoy most hearing somebody sing a song just out in the blue. like in Salzburg, a man was washing windows on a castle, and then he was singing "Que sera, sera," and that was a real kick to me.
I wanted to ask them about Bonanza. There is a lyric to the theme from Bum-Ba-Da-Dum-Ba-Da-Dum, and that it's kind of a tongue twister, almost one of those Gilbert and Sullivan patter songs.
The four principals sang it right into the camera on the first episode, and they sounded so ridiculous, they cut it. It went, "We got a right to fight a little fight, Bonanza."
And one of the things I mentioned to Ray and Jay is that columnist Mike Royko in Chicago used Tammy as an example of something he said we should be able to do as humans, and that is purge anything we want out of our minds. He said everyone knew the lyric from Tammy, and maybe when they went to bed at night, they should just say, "Tomorrow I won't need it unless I'm going to be on Jeopardy."
Well, I'm very flattered because to even know that Mike Royker knew anything about Tammy, that he would know the lyrics or be able to allude to it in one of his famous columns, that enhances the ego. It's one of the peripheral rewards of being in this business, of having that great communication. Instead of thinking about, when you hear songs, I had a crazy one. I was in East Germany, East Berlin, before the wall was down. It was really a closed society. So I was with a tourist group. We'd come out of Russia, and I was in a very elegant, brand new hotel that had just been built there. So I went into the bar, and there was a kind of a lousy-looking band playing on a stage, 4 or 5 pieces, and they're playing something, and said, "Gee, that sounds familiar. What did?" And I suddenly realized it was a song we had written for Bob Hope 40 years ago called "A Thousand Violins." So when they finished it, I went for the band. I said, "Thank you very much. I'm one of the writers of the song." And they just stared at me. So I went to the bartender who spoke a little English and said, "No, they just played a song that I had written. I'm an American tourist here. Would you tell them how appreciative I am of they play it?" He said, "I can't talk to them. They're from Bulgaria." Now, how 40 years later does a band from Bulgaria in East Germany find American Livingston Evans song written for Bob Hope and they perform it? That is one of the great things of being in the music business.
My favorite song is All the Things You Are. I whistle it all the time, and I think of these wonderful arrangements where the whole orchestra bump, 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 stops, leaving that, where you come back in and fit, like Laura has one of those, bump, 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 and you have an opportunity to go, "And you see," and then the whole band would come back in. But you think of melodies which become so ingrained in us that children know them. And I can't imagine wherever Jerome Kern is right now that when he wrote All the Things You Are, he would think that here, with the millennium almost over, that it's still being heard and performed every day.
Well, the songs of that era have never ended. Fortunately for us, we get new records all the time. All our songs, especially Que Sera, Sera, Mona Lisa, and that song called Never Let Me Go, which is my favorite. It's in the jazz world. We wrote it for Nat Cole for a picture. Cleo Lane is a great record, a lot of records. So these records are being done all the time now because they can't record instrumentally a rock song. There's no melody. So they have to come to us and our colleagues.
Captain Carey, USA. Was it Alan Ladd? It's that wonderful movie where they had a special effect where someone gets hit in the face and they had put a piece of glass in front of them, so when the vase hits them, it hits the glass and it makes it look like it hit them in the face, but it left a piece of vase on the glass. It's one of those wonderful special effects that didn't work. For those who don't remember, the song Mona Lisa, Men Have Named You was sung in this village, I think, as a cue that there was danger, right?
That's right. A Nazi patrol was near. Alan Ladd was with the OSS, the forerunner of the CIA, and he was there fighting, helping fight the Nazis. And when a Nazi patrol was coming in, the picture, the producer, the scriptwriter needed a song to warn the partisans that get out of the way. It's dangerous, as you said. And instead of going mysterioso, we said we'll write the prettiest Italian-style song we can. And luckily, we got Nat Cole to record it, etc. And the rest is history. It has become an annuity for us.
Well, now, if they had Miklos Rocha do that, he would have had a theremin being played, I think, when the Nazis showed up.
That's right. Well, the trick was that there was a street accordion player, and when he was tipped off that the Nazis were coming, he would play Mona Lisa and Alan Ladd get out of the way. It was a very unimportant assignment, but it turned out to be an important song.
And Nat King Cole did a marvelous recording of it. I wanted to find out from Jay Livingston and Ray Evans just what the late Nat King Cole was like.
He was a gentleman. He was as gentle as his voice. I think that's what's made him so popular.
I think it's difficult now. Certainly we still have racial bias in this country, but to think there was a time when this man was a megastar and they couldn't find a sponsor for his TV show.
Not only that, but he was forced off the stage, and I think in Birmingham, Alabama. He wanted to be a professional baseball player. He probably was good enough to do it, but there were no African-American baseball players in those days. Oh, he was a real gentleman, a sweet man, and a great interpreter of music, song, jazz, and everything else.
Well, you know, even if he'd never sung, some of the improvisational things he did in concert on the piano will stand out forever as being really excellent top-of-the-line stuff.
Well, he was a great pianist. He was playing downtown in a little joint, and he never sang. And a drunk came over threatening and said, "I want you to sing Sweet Lorraine." And that was the first song he ever sang. And Johnny Mercer heard him and brought him up to Capitol. The record company that Johnny had started was just a few people, and that started Nat Cole. Nat didn't like people to play songs for him. He was such a musician, he just wanted the music. But Paramount made a big deal about Mona Lisa, and he had to listen to us at his home. He didn't like to say no to people. That's why he didn't want to listen to a song. So we played it for him. It was on the back side of a record called The Greatest Inventor of Them All. It was supposed to be a big hit. Never even mentioned Mona Lisa in their ads. And that's how that thing happened.
I love those songs that are B-sides. There's the great Jimmy Dean who realized that he had an odd number of sides. And on a plane going back to Nashville, he wrote Big John, which was on the back of a song called Cajun Queen, which they thought was going to be the big hit. Who's ever heard Cajun Queen?
Capitol didn't even want to release it. They thought this will never sell. And so they had to have put something in a hurry on the backside of The Greatest Inventor of Them All. So they just reached in the file and took out Mona Lisa, put it on the back, said nobody's going to hear this anyway. What difference it make? And anyway, they were proved wrong, and we were the lucky ones because they were proven wrong.
When was the transition to rock music, getting away from those beautiful melody lines? When did that all start happening in radio?
I think this all started in the 50s, you know, with Fats Domino, Presley, the Beatles. Suddenly a new music came along. The young generation, suddenly the Vietnam War, the peace marches, the love-ins, etc. Music became the flag under which they all marched, because they said, we're different from our parents, we want a better world. Maybe it didn't turn out to be a better world, but that's what they wanted. And suddenly the roots of so much of the music was written and was in rhythm and blues and gospel, etc., etc. So I'd say in the late 50s, late 60s, then it became a flood, an inundation. All radio stations that were playing music were getting into this, and goodbye Wayne King and Jerome Kern and Livingston and Evans and people like that. Yeah.
Steve Allen told me one time, I said, how come we don't have these wonderful long legato melody lines anymore? And he picked a year, I forget what it was, in the 30s, and named me about 11 composers who were all alive at the same time. And he said, what a marvelous era that was. He said they wrote for the piano. And in the 1950s, people started writing for the guitar.
That's right.
And you cannot play long, flowing lines on guitar. It lends itself to be choppy and short lyrics and short melodies.
What they did was play chords on the guitar and sang to it, but it didn't have any melody to it. And that's why it doesn't last. So they make a lot of money because they own the records and the record companies, but their songs don't last. We're really better off, I think.
We get the 20-year extension on the copyright bill. Our copyrights will outlive Jay and myself by quite a few years because, as you say, you can do beautiful melodies on the piano because it's a composition instrument, but a guitar isn't. And we've been said that so many times that on the piano you can do nicer things.
I often thought it would be a funny routine, kind of a Bob Newhart thing, where Maurice Ravel goes into a music publisher. Yeah. He says, I have a new melody. And the fellow said, what is it? He said, well, it's kind of long. He said, well, just play the melody line until you get to the repeat. And it's Bolero, of course, which it really doesn't have one.
Well, you know what happens now? The record men, producers, are all young. They're all into rock. And if I walked in with Begin the Beguine, they'd laugh me out of the office. They can't write those songs for them anymore because they don't understand them.
And that would be a foreign language to them. It just doesn't happen anymore because that's not their bag. That's not their thing.
So is it a whole different era? I mean, you say Begin the Beguine. It's a little hard to hold the mic and do this, but I hear the kind of syncopated rhythm that has to go with it. You mentioned marching bands. Why does every marching band, even at an all-American event, play Brazil? I've never figured out why they play Brazil all the
I
time.
thought they played Sousa. Did they play Brazil?
Oh, yeah, you'll hear... Maybe it's because half the band can do that while the other half plays the melody.
Or they do a lot of rock now. I go to all the SC games here and the home game, and they're playing rock all the time, and it's awful rock. 250 musicians, cannot play rock when they're marching around the field, but they do play Brazil every once in a while. And the Stars and Stripes, every show, they do it some kind of a syncopated beat, which is not the way to play the song. It doesn't get the march. It doesn't give it its flavor.
I had to ask about Tammy, how that wonderful song and how those beautiful lyrics got started. And I was told by songwriters Jay Livingston and Ray Evans that the lyric we know now was born slightly differently.
I hear the sycamores whispering about it. I didn't like
Cottonwoods.
I didn't like the sound of sycamores.
Oh, I'm sorry. I
No,
ruined your
that's how we
story.
wrote
You
it.
want to start it over?
No. Oh, I hear the sycamores whispering about. So I have a book that lists. I looked up trees, and there was cottonwoods. And that sounded real pretty. They looked up cottonwoods in the dictionary and said it's indigenous to the South, which is where this picture took place. So I became cottonwoods. That's how you write. You work it out. We had a song in the Tales of Vienna Woods that we wrote the lyric to. Put something about the chestnut trees. I didn't know what kind of trees they had in the Vienna Woods. We couldn't find out. He said, well, who's going to care? I went to Vienna one day. We were driving through. I said, what kind of trees are those? The guy said, they're all chestnut trees.
We did this a jazz version, a Dixieland version for an album we did with Bing Crosby and Rosemary Clooney, traveling around the world and taking national songs and giving them a Dixie beat. So we took the Tales of Vienna Woods for Austria, and one of the lines, as Jay said, was something about the chestnut trees, and we were right. There were chestnut trees there by luck, yeah.
What is it like to turn on the TV and today hear the Bonanza theme and the theme from Mr. Ed, decades after all of this was done? I guess it's fun, and you still getting checks from that?
Oh, yeah, absolutely, sure, because thank goodness for ASCAP, which, pays our royalties on performances, and you don't get very much because the big payoff is when you get a coast-to-coast television show, and you don't get that on Bonanza, Mr. Ed, anymore, but all the stations that do either one or both of those, it does add up, and it's not only an economic guarantee, but it's very, very nice to hear something you did done being used again, like one of your children winning a prize, if you have children.
Do you have a favorite melody you wrote?
Yes, Never Let Me Go.
Can you play a little bit of it?
Never let me go, love me much too much. If you let me go, life would lose its touch. What would I be without you? There's no place for me without you. That's a favorite because it has a lot of chord changes. See, all of our hit songs are very simple. And when I played this for Nelson Riddle, for Nat Cole, to make an arrangement, he said, you didn't write that. You get tagged as a guy that doesn't have that much musical ability. But that's my favorite.
Jazz people take it up. We've had hundreds of recordings in the jazz world by this. Woody Herman did it. Bill Evans did a 10-minute rendition in a CD. All kinds of people have done it. So it's a feather in our cap. And we've been accepted in the jazz world, at least on that one song.
I thought of two songs that if I were ever a cabaret singer, that have license, have the opportunity to do a lot of chord changes. And one is When Sunny Gets Blue.
Yeah.
And the other one is My Funny Valentine, when you can do bum, 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 bum. You can do a lot underneath it.
I love that song. Yeah.
Isn't it amazing, maybe not to you, but to me, how much the arrangement is so essential to our concept of the song? If you were to write, well, for example, take one of the songs you've written and just with one finger play the melody line stripped down to the lowest common denominator of the song.
That's the melody.
Okay. And if you went to plug that song and just played that for someone, they would think, well, that's kind of nice. But now add to it the layers of texture that give the song all the nuance it has.
Well, you have to have the harmonies. I play badly now. I haven't played for years.
Well, you're trying to play not in the key of C is the
No,
problem.
no,
I have to write everything in C so it doesn't have any accidentals.
Yeah, right.
I remember I picked up a piece of music that Anthony Newley and Leslie Brickus had written. I think it was for The Roar of the Grease Paint, The Smell of the Crowd.
Yeah,
one of those.
that was their big show.
It was so bloody with sharps and flats. I thought, I can't play this.
Did you?
No, I'm not that good. I needed one of those pianos where you can transpose everything.
Like Irving Berlin had. I think he could play in one key, I'm told. He had a hit a lever and he could transpose it so he could play it.
He played in G flat. That's all he played in, all the black notes. And you can hear how he did it, like I'll be loving you all I do. Now he pressed the lever, da 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 da, got another key. You see, that's how he got it. All his songs you can tell when he pushed over.
And he did great songs, wonderful. Tell me, don't do that.
Did you know Hal Bourne?
Yeah.
Slightly. I didn't know him well.
I saw him on a documentary. He was apparently the pianist for the rehearsals for Fred Astaire and Ginger Rogers. And he was talking about how Irving Berlin, this guy who never went past 5th grade, came up with these entangling, intertwining rhymes and things.
Wonderful, incredible, absolutely. And not only that, but great melodies putting on the ridge. I don't know, that's one of the greatest melodies, not great, but most intricate, complicated melodies I've ever heard. You try to sing that it's almost impossible. But he got great rhymes, great things to it. He was really a genius, no question of it.
Who wrote In the Still of the Night?
Cole Porter.
Like the moon growing dim on the rim of a hill in the chill still of the night.
See,
talk about AAABB.
Yeah, sure. And that's what makes rhyming so good. And today they just ignore rhyming. The rock songs or whatever they do, rhyming means nothing. But when you do the rhyming right, it adds so much to the context and the pleasure of the composition.
You wrote a line that I think is deserving of Johnny Mercer.
Too nice.
And that is in Tammy, the old hooty owl hooty hoots. Now hooty hoos. I'm sorry.
Yeah, it's almost right.
I always thought that is second only to ahooey ahooey.
Oh well, same syllable, same sound.
Pulled out of a hat
Sure.
for that song.
We had to rhyme love, which is a very important word, but it's very hard to rhyme. So we hooty-hoo to the dove, and got past it that way.
That's right. That took the what's the word I want? The cliche out of it by doing that. Yeah, that killed the cliche. Yeah.
We're coming up on the holidays here. Let me ask about Silver Bell and your association with Bob Hope. How did all that come about?
Well, in our first 6 months at Paramount, we were assigned to write songs for Bob Hope, picture called Monsieur Beaucaire. That's when we met Bob Hope. We started writing material for his act, or his TV show, and from 1947, I would say, until about 3 years ago, we wrote everything for Bob Hope. His picture songs, his TV songs, and everything.
Go ahead.
Silver Bells was for a movie in 1950-51 called The Lemon Drop Kid, where he had to disguise himself as Santa Claus to get away from the gangsters who were after him to pay off his bad debts. And they needed a Christmas song, and luckily we came up with Silver Bells. And that has really been an annuity too. It's sold about, I think, 200 to 300 million records by this time. And it's incredible. Every year it gets 3 or 4 new records on it, and it's become a great Christmas standard. So, when you really hit the jackpot, you really hit it big, and we have.
Earlier on, they talked about how sometimes they had to write on a very quick deadline, and they related to me a story in which they had to change a song super quickly.
Victor Young was conducting for Cecil B. DeMille, who sat behind him, for a picture called The Unconquered. He had a 44-piece orchestra, a 12-voice choir, and there's a black man blowing across the river. DeMille didn't like it. Now, he sees us sitting there, and he said, "Take 10. Calls us. We run upstairs. We wrote. I said, "What are they doing?" They're rowing home. That's the title. Before we ever got to our office, we had Rowing Home. We wrote Rowing Home as fast as you can write. Had it copied, and he went downstairs at the recording studio. They recorded Rowing Home. And when I see that picture, I laugh all the time.
And DeMille approved it. He said, "Okay, that's fine. I didn't like what you're doing before, but this is fine." So it was written in 10, 15 minutes, but when you have to do it, you can do it. It'll never go down in history, but it was done.
DeMille, to me, had the knack of picking composers that were not necessarily well known for some of his movies. The original Cleopatra with Claudette Colbert. I'm trying to remember who did them, but I've never seen his name in the credits since.
Yeah, I don't know who that was, but Victor Young did a lot of DeMille pictures because he was on a contract at Paramount, and that's, they use a contract. In those days, the studios had composers and songwriters and a contract, so you worked on in-house kind of things, and that's why we got a lot of jobs.
Well, you look at the studios. You look at RKO. You got Paul Sawtelle and Roy Webb.
Fox, they had all the Newmans and et cetera, and John at MGM, they had everybody.
What is it in the genetics of the Newman family? It's Alfred A. Meal and Lionel is the first generation, and now you've got Randy, James, and there's another one.
Yeah, I know. Sure, yeah. I can't tell you. Only a sociologist or whatever, an analyst, a fiscal analyst could tell you. But that family sure has crossed a lot of thresholds and crossed a lot of boundaries.
The music that you were writing, they just don't do that anymore.
Of course not, because that's the way the world has changed. The rock things that Jay said have no melody, and the whole world has changed.
Let me wrap this up by thanking both of you. And your careers aren't finished yet by any means.
Oh, of course not.
But the wealth of what you've done that has become so much a part of our culture.
Well, we're very fortunate. I feel every morning I wake up, I'm flattered to say what a wonderful, rewarding, exciting life I have, and as long as it continues, that I'm going to have those feelings. So that's where it is in regard to myself.
Got one question for you. I want a new theme for this radio show. How much will you charge me?
I don't know. That's too far for me to tell you.
Gentlemen, it's been a real thrill for me to be here, and we could have gone on and sung and played all afternoon. I want to thank you for your time.
We could have danced all night if you'd like.
Ray Evans and Jay Livingston. You cannot go through a day without hearing some of their songs. I'm Dennis Daly.